What's up, everybody? I just 3-0'd my local this past Monday. I was borrowing a deck from one of my locals, and I figured I'd give some feedback on it, not just to them, but, to the community at whole. So, at face value, this deck is doing something very, very simple, something very, very obvious, and that is we're just stunning our rivals' board out. There's nothing super clever or tricky. You can call it pretty honest universes overall. Stun is not the most deceptive keyword, right? And most importantly, people aren't fixated on stopping it. I do think at like major events and things like that for the last regional season, uh, people had Toga on their radar, right? And Walk the Dog exists. And so like these little incremental stuns mattered a lot. But nobody is like selling out to prevent a stun game plan. And the perfect example of that is in round 3 of the local. I played against a Void discard Bakugo deck that was pretty sweet. I might actually get some feedback from Brett Hillman and do a video on that deck as well, because it's got some things that I like a lot, especially for a locals deck. And that's I should reiterate, this is like very important that this is like a deck for your locals, right? This is not necessarily something that is fine tuned, or I would say, take this into a super competitive environment. That being said, I did not make this list, of course, so I can't give you like a super in-depth breakdown. These aren't all the choices I would make, but I can talk about my experience playing the deck. So, oh, the point about the Void deck from earlier. So yeah, I've been doing scripts recently for the. We're doing scripts recently, and this one's unscripted, so you get the fun rambling ace maneuvers again. So the in round 3, I played against a Void deck who didn't even have Keeping Airy Safe mainboarded. Right, he had a 10-card sideboard, and 4 of those cards were Keeping Airy Safe. So that's just the level at which people are prioritizing things like Botan's coaching, or if your character has a specific zero diff like Bakugo, the discard Void Bakugo deck likes the 0/5 that just reduces damage by 1 because it's defensive, or it's a 0 diff that gives 2 damage. So, and I think it's playable while committed. Yeah, so it's like it's technically anti-stun too, but not in the way that Keeping Airy Safe could be, right? So situationally, it might be what you actually need, especially against a deck that is so heavily stunning you out. But I didn't run into like heroic aspirations. I didn't run into keyword hate. No one was taking like stun off of my cards. So all in all, every game worked out pretty much the same. We won with Walk the Dog pretty much every time. I think we had a Cinder Convection that was like the penultimate attack before a Walk the Dog, but it ended up being lethal. And so the attack lineup is very, very simple. Frozen Slash allows us to pass our +2/+2 buff onto the next attack, which can be pretty important. Doubling those stats is pretty strong overall. And on top of that, there is a Deadlock Enhance where the rival loses 1 health for each ranged attack in your card pool. And it technically came up. I technically did put someone at 3 life with my first 2 attacks and then play the Frozen Slash. But I think we were going to get there without the Deadlock Burn 3. But against a character like a Rodan or something like that, that wouldn't have been quite as obvious. So the Deadlock Enhance, definitely one of the crazier ones, right? We have a burn effect that can actually win you the game. So never forget about that. Shards of Winter is one of the newer cards in the deck. One of the things that kind of makes it work is that we have a 4 difficulty cantrip attack that fits our gimmick. It fits all of our keywords. It has ranged, it has stun. If it deals, we draw a card, and it gets a lot of speed for Committed Foundation. So I was pretty routinely getting this to like a 5 mid 5, right, without using any of my once per turns on this attack. We were able to play it as the second attack a lot, get like a stun 2, stun 3 kind of combo out there to lead things off. Especially if we put the +2/+2 on Frozen Slash into this, right? It's very easy to get this into like the 7 mid 7 territory, which is absolutely what you're looking for with a 6 hand size character who isn't doing a whole lot on defense. Now, where this character is working in this sort of metagame is the card Heaven Piercing Ice Wall. And so, again, I don't know the exact ratios, but this felt like a 4 of, and it should be a 4 of. One of the unique plays that this deck kind of gets to do is we get to freeze up to 2 foundations stunned during this attack, right? And obviously this card has stun 1, so that's not going to happen for any other characters, but because we can add stun 2 to it and we get to stun 3 total, you get a pretty good option. You get a pretty good assortment of options typically, especially if your opponent's not paying attention. They don't know what this card does. I think I caught somebody sleep. I know I caught Brett Hellman sleeping once because he had 2 defensive card draw abilities and he had 2 irritated, and irritated is the 1/5 that lets Bakugo get like crazy stats. I think you commit it for essentially +2/+2 on a 1 diff. So he had stunned 2 of those out, and those got frozen, which almost certainly bought me a whole nother turn, right? You get to skip the rival turn. So I never got to play 2 of these in the same turn. And I think that's where you get like the ultimate turn skip, right? This has me looking at playing the water symbol with Heaven Piercing Ice Wall in this character, because I can only imagine going Vast Hybrid into Heaven Piercing Ice Wall is effectively a turn skip for a lot of decks. And you'll still get pretty much all of these cards on water, all of the attacks except Walk the Dog, right? So Walk the Dog is the main star of the show, though. The 6/6 wears the +2/+2 so well. You enable it with your character, obviously with the stun. And then what this symbol needs, what Order needs a lot, is a 4 difficulty card draw attack. So Shards of Winter is doing that a lot for us, but with a condition. And Walk the Dog is just doing that, right? So I mentioned I won pretty much all my games off the back of Walk the Dog. In water, you would have to find a different win condition, almost certainly more dependent on momentum. The Powerful 3 didn't come up too often. I think I used it once to force a block, right, to get into a position where a normal damage move would actually deal lethal. So the Powerful wasn't a too big of a deal. The one thing that really threw me off was I was not getting a lot of momentum. People were blocking the pokes, they were blocking the big damage one. They were taking the Shards of Winter for 5, and so I would end up like 1 momentum, but I'd have to spend it or add it back to my hand as a block. So it was a little difficult to use things like Cinder Convection. I did Cinder Convections stun 3 and stun 2 one time, and that felt pretty good. And of course we gave it the 2/2, and so we ended up with like a 5 mid for 9 stun 5, right, at the cost of 1 momentum and every button on my character. But that felt really good. So it was really nice that was potent enough in this metagame. And I can only imagine that this wasn't an absolute back-breaking attack when it first debuted, because of cards like It Can't Be Fixed, right? Even cards like Requesting Assistance, allowing you to flip and ready things in between the 2 stun abilities. So it was really nice to see essentially no interaction for my stun attacks, and to be able to hit like the stun 5s and things. So again, it's a locals. These kinds of moves should get you there. We have the Ice Sword Execution, the only non-ranged attack in the deck, and I mean it definitely helps our strategy, right? Walk the Dog and Ice Sword Execution absolutely go together on the order symbol. You get to name the foundation that they have the most of, and it commits all of them. And I got to spend the momentum once or twice to free something, right? We talked about Fast Hybrid Chimera Kraken working in tandem with Heaven Piercing Ice Wall. So there was one turn where I wasn't dealing any damage because they had enough speed reduction, but I did get to stun 3 and freeze 3 with Heaven Piercing Ice Wall and Ice Sword spending the momentum. So we did get something similar to that, but it did cost me the momentum. So it didn't feel too good to get the Ice Sword blocked and then have the Heaven Piercing Ice Wall blocked, but it was good enough, and I think that's where this character is kind of supposed to be. So all in all, I enjoyed playing the deck a lot more than I thought I would. Another few notable cards before I go is Showdown, of course, fits this game plan a whole lot. One of the few cards that really can throw you off when you're trying to send a walk the dog for game is Barrier Shield. So Showdown can kind of help you with that. The Commit 2 Foundation cost is pretty heavy, though. I actually fail a lot of the Showdowns that I try to play on a 6, because you have to commit the 2 foundations before you pass that check, right? So yeah, there's a lot of action cards that can get in the way, a lot of hand traps that, you can solve the board, but you can't solve the hand trap. So Showdown really does do more than just stun 2 on block. We had the 4 fighting for control, because when we're freezing foundations and when we're trying to get walk the dog turned on, this is a huge one. Fighting for control, it forces the rival a lot of times to either discard a card or commit the foundations that they would normally stun. And this is where people get tripped up. They check a 5 on a 5 diff. You say, all right, -2, and they immediately commit their 2 face downs. They don't care. They've got the real estate to pay for it, especially when I'm like pretty committed out, and I don't have too much defensively going on. But what that ends up doing later, this is the consequences of our actions. When I hit that first stun 2, that first stun 3, we get really close to stunning out important cards. So you really can't afford to commit foundations offensively against this deck. I mean, especially when we get the fighting for control into the Showdown. So we still got to commit the ones that we wanted anyways, and now you're out 4 foundations. Very, very, very strong stuff. Very low input, high skill ceiling though kind of card, because I definitely wasted some fighting for controls in situations where they were not helpful. So you do have to be careful. The rival failing the check and not ending the combat phase can oftentimes be not very consequential when you're low health, when you're very vulnerable, I guess is a better way to put it. If the rival can afford to lose a card from hand, a whole attack from their hand, you're pretty much screwed. So it's not a end-all be-all solution. Hacker Extraordinaire is really cool here because not only can we spend momentum to draw a card and flip assets, which is absolutely something you have to be able to do in this format, is solve assets. We can take 5 damage and add the top card of our deck to momentum, and we can pick it back up with our character. So this one's like a really cute little tech. It's not super duper important, and it doesn't seem that impactful until you are fighting an asset deck. And again, like, it was pretty starved for momentum. So I think if you want to build this order Todoroki list, maybe look for like strategic meetings over the defrostings. The defrostings were helpful for getting Frozen Slash activated. In terms of, we were talking about that low input defense, like fighting for control, right? Things that don't require us to block with cards from our hand. Defrosting does a pretty good job at just, mill 1 and get -1 damage. But overall, Hacker Extraordinaire was really, really nice because it allowed Ice Sword Execution and Cinder Convection to be something that is way more punishing than people realize when they just want to deal some damage, draw some cards, your basic turn 2 poke. So getting this out early was really important. The last card I'll talk about is Making a Stand. There's very few repeatable +1 damage sources out there. You see Endeavors play Revel at his Masterpiece. I remembered it. It's a lot of words. Revel as Masterpiece is one of the few that you see because it's essentially free and works on any attack. But it's still a 2/5 that does nothing else. We have moved a lot away from the string 5 or 6 attacks with repeatable +1s on every single thing, but we are still putting together like 3 to 4 string attacks. And when your repeatable +1 damage works on all of your attacks, because we built the deck to have stun on everything. Again, I think Ice Sword is the only one that misses out here, right? Ice Sword is good enough to make it in without having the right keywords, but because it's not ranged, you can't give it stun. So having a repeatable +1 damage source, also have flip your rival discards 1 momentum, pretty important right now. So that is a unique thing that Todoroki2 kind of gets to do, right? Is have a string buffer. A repeatable +1 damage source is still pretty good right now. I mean, it's still nothing to sneeze at when you get 2 of them out. It's just they're no longer on our 0 diffs and our 1 diffs. So those sort of strategies have been reined in a bit. But I definitely won a couple games because I managed to get one making the stand out, and we played a walk the dog on a 6, we played a walk a dog on a 7, and we played a walk a dog on an 8. And without the, you know, let's see how many attacks, 5 attacks, yeah, without like the 4 damage, because I had to commit it on the last one, but without that plus 4 damage, we would not have been able to send the walk the dog for exact lethal. So definitely one to watch out for. I used to clown on this card a lot because it was too slow. There's definitely a format where enhancing to discard a rival momentum, especially when they get to choose, was just too slow. They would spend it before you get to it. And in previous formats where your repeatable +1 damage source was a 0 div, this one didn't look too good, but I think I'm here for it now. I think stun is pretty good right now. And again, if you want to go to your locals and you want to have a good time and you don't want to go to the 60-minute time limit every round, I can definitely suggest a character like Todoroki2. He's going to reduce a lot of the decisions on the board. And at the same time, this deck isn't really going to interfere with what your opponent is doing too much, right? We obviously have to have interaction. We obviously have to have, ways to block. We have to have, ways to freeze their stage. So we are limiting some options, but we're not outright like canceling anything. We're not putting up a massive wall. So this is a perfect deck to kind of play bumper cars with your opponent where you go, okay, here's my best moves. I've stunned you out. I don't really have to sweat over every little decision you're doing. Your opponent is now passing every enhance because they don't have any left to play. So it makes games quick and fun, and that's all you really need at a local.